You hear stories about the perfect crime, right? A masterpiece of planning, of pure nerve. Well, this is the story of how a crew of so-called gentlemen thieves pulled off what might be the largest hotel robbery in history, and how their perfect plan ended up becoming a curse. This is the story of the great Pierre Hotel robbery.
Okay, let's just start with the number. The number that made this whole thing legendary. In today's money, the score was over $27 million. I mean, a haul so massive, it wouldn't just make them rich beyond their wildest dreams, it would put them in a class all by themselves.
And look, this wasn't just another big score. It was so audacious, so incredibly successful, that it actually earned a spot in history. The Guinness Book of World Records literally calls it the largest, most successful hotel robbery in history. So yeah, this was way more than a theft. It was a masterpiece of crime.
Now, a crime of this magnitude, it takes more than just guts. It takes genius. So, who were these masterminds? Let's meet the crew that planned and pulled off history's greatest hotel heist.
First off, this was not a crew of amateurs. These guys were seasoned professionals with some very serious connections. Samuel Nala was the planner, the brains of the operation. He brought in Robert Bobby Comfort, a career thief with ties to the Rochester mob, and Christy the Tick Frunari, an associate of the powerful Lucchese crime family. This was basically a supergroup from the criminal underworld.
And the Pierre wasn't just some random target. It was the grand finale of a whole crime spree. This crew had been honing their skills for a while, hitting New York's most exclusive hotels one by one, the Regency, the Drake, the Carlyle. They were specialists, a well-oiled machine that went after the city's richest and most secure spots.
Okay, so with a crew this skilled, the plan had to be just as brilliant. Every single detail was meticulously crafted. So how'd they do it? How did they design what they thought was the perfect, untraceable crime?
The timing was just genius. They chose the early morning hours of January 2nd, 1972. Think about it. New York's high society is completely passed out, sleeping off a long night of New Year's Eve parties. And where are their most valuable jewels? Not in some bank vault. They're right there, inside the hotel's safety deposit boxes. And the best part? Guarding all of it was just a minimal, exhausted skeleton crew.
So to pull this off, Nallo assembled a hand-picked team of specialists. Bobby Germain was the artist, an expert at cracking lockboxes. For intimidation, they had a guy named Ali Bin, a contract killer whose reputation alone was enough. Al Green was the wheelman, and Donald Francos was there to provide the raw muscle. Every man was a crucial piece in this perfectly designed machine.
All right, the plan was set. The team was in place. Now, all that was left was to do it. And in the pre-dawn quiet of a New York morning, the perfect crime started to unfold.
It honestly unfolded like a scene straight out of a movie. First, they used a ruse. A fake Dr. Foster reservation got them right past the front desk. Then, they took control, swiftly subduing the skeleton crew and taking 19 hostages without ever firing a shot. Next up, the loot. While the hostages were kept quiet, their expert got to work on the lockboxes. And finally, the exit. After just 2.5 hours, they just vanished into the morning, long before the next shift even arrived.
But here's what really sets this heist apart, what makes it so cinematic. It was their style. I mean, they were the absolute epitome of gentlemen thieves. Throughout the entire ordeal, they were calm, professional, and just bizarrely polite. Hostages were called sir and miss, voices were never raised. It was this terrifying yet almost theatrical performance. And for the final, just unbelievably audacious touch, as they were leaving, one of the robbers walked over to the bound hotel employees and handed each one of them a $20 bill, a tip for their trouble. It was this act of incredible, almost arrogant confidence, a detail that would become an iconic part of the legend.
So the heist was perfect. The getaway was clean. They had, for all intents and purposes, pulled off the crime of the century. But this is exactly where the story takes a sharp, dramatic turn. The unraveling begins.
And right here, this is the central irony of the whole story. The insane discipline and professionalism that made the heist work, it completely vanished in the aftermath. The cool, calculated success gave way to a messy, chaotic, and ultimately disastrous greed. So the first crack in their perfect crime showed up almost immediately. To turn all those jewels into cash, they needed a fence. Nala went to his Lucchese family contact, Christy Frunari. Well, the mob's price was steep,
a one-third cut of the entire score. Nalo was furious. Any honor among thieves just evaporated, and the fight over the money shattered the crew's unity.
So what happened to that $27 million fortune? Well, it just vanished, scattered to the winds by greed and betrayal. A part of it was fenced, but a huge chunk was stolen by a friend Nalo trusted. The Rochester mob kept their share, the police recovered a tiny amount, and the rest was just lost in this web of double crosses. The fortune was gone, almost as quickly as it appeared.
And the collapse was fast. I mean, really fast. Thanks to an informant's tip, the two masterminds, Samuel Nalo and Bobby Comfort, were in police custody within weeks of the robbery. The perfect crime had a very, very short shelf life.
But getting arrested was just the beginning. The heist, it seems, unleashed a curse of greed and violence that would follow this crew for decades. This is the part of the story about betrayal and retribution.
This curse, it played out over decades, leaving a literal trail of blood. In 1981, the crew's muscle, Donald Francos, murdered two of his fellow robbers. In 1988, the mastermind Samuel Nalo was shot and killed by an unknown gunman. And today, only one known survivor remains, and he's living out his days in the Witness Protection Program.
And what fueled all this violence? Broken promises. The muscle, Donald Francos, was promised a share of $750,000. In the end, he only got $175,000. He was enraged, felt totally cheated, and so he took matters into his own hands, exacting a bloody revenge that just showed how toxic and deadly the greed had become.
In the end, the Pierre Hotel robbery was a masterclass in planning and execution. It went down in history as this legendary, perfect crime. But when you look at the decades of chaos, betrayal, prison, and murder that followed, you really have to ask yourself, was it ever perfect at all?